So the 30-second cliff notes of this book, The Psychology of Money, is that doing well with money has much more to do with emotions and behavior and far less to do with intellect and math. If you're new here, my name is Alice. I'm a chartered professional accountant. On this channel, we discuss personal finance and digital marketing. So do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. The first principle in this book is that we all have our own mental models about money. One of my favorite takeaways from this book is this quote: "Everyone has their own unique experience with how the world works. What seems crazy to you might make sense to me." A person who grew up in poverty thinks about risk and reward in ways that the child of a wealthy banker cannot fathom if he tried. Our personal experiences make up 0.00001% of what happens in the world, but also contributes to 80% of how you think the world works. This is so eloquently spoken and absolutely true. I posted another video where I talked about how the traditional school system doesn't teach us about money, and we adopt money habits from our parents, who adopted their money habits from their parents. For example, the decision to pay off a mortgage or invest, in theory, should be based on interest rates. But in reality, some people don't like the burden and the feeling of being in debt. Another example, if your parents taught you to save 50% of what you make, then you're probably going to have that imprinted in your head subconsciously, and you're going to build up that habit at an early age of saving 50% of what you make. The takeaway from this principle is that we all have our own mental models about money that we learn directly from our upbringing, and these experiences shape our narrative about the world, and it shapes the way that we manage money. And really it goes to show that managing money has much more to do with behavioral psychology, which are things that we adopt from our surroundings. The second principle is why education itself can be deceiving. In the introduction, the author introduces us to a man named Ronald Read, the janitor that worked at a gas station, bought a house for $12,000 at the age of 38, and he lived there until he died. And when he died, he left $2 million to his kids and $6 million to charity. People were absolutely shocked. And in contrast, we're drawn to a man who was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with an MBA, one of the most successful business people that was publicly known, but he didn't survive the 2008 financial crisis. He went bankrupt and he foreclosed on multiple properties. Now, there's definitely a big takeaway from this story, which is the whole purpose of the book, and that is that education in itself, isolated, can be deceiving. Correlation doesn't always equal causation. Education and business savviness is a different skill set than personal finance and managing money. I would definitely agree that there's some degree of correlation, and I do think that these two examples, in my opinion, are exceptions, not necessarily the rules. But they're also very powerful examples that we can learn from and definitely worth a takeaway. As a CPA, I know that there are a lot of people who have high-paying jobs and are highly educated and do very well with money. There are also a lot of people with similar backgrounds to Ronald Read that do not end up with $8 million in their bank accounts at the end of their life. So those are definitely two extremes. Really good examples to learn from, but not necessarily, applicable to everyone. The key takeaway is that income doesn't automatically lead to wealth, because the gap between income and wealth is your lifestyle. Principle number 3 is the financial goalpost. Quote, "The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving." Now, the author uses some pretty extreme examples to illustrate this point, but the takeaway from this principle, or what I learned from it, is that it's important to be grateful for what you have. And I think it's possible to be grateful for what you have and still want to achieve more. But I would also argue that while it's a good lesson in theory, a lot of people, more often than not, probably struggle with the opposite. Most people in life probably will never get to a point where this truly becomes a financial skill that they have to master. But I definitely agree that no matter how much you make, it is very important to be grateful and do understand what is enough. Even as a business owner, understanding what is enough can really help alleviate feelings of anxiety and stress. I think the problem that Morgan is trying to illustrate is that when you're not grateful for what you have and your desire for more comes out of a lack of fulfillment or a lack of gratitude and just being unhappy in general, that could obviously lead to a problem because then your financial goalposts will never stop. Principle number 4 is social comparison. And I really love that Morgan touched on this in his book because not many finance books, personal finance books, talk about this, but it's very powerful and it actually impacts a lot of people's decisions. It can definitely contribute to the feeling of not having enough, and it's very much an emotional intellect, in my opinion. There's a side where you are the average of the 5 people that you hang out, right? Which alludes to, having a good environment, having good friendships and stuff like that. And being around other people that want more for themselves and want to do better will lead you to make better decisions about money and life in general. And then there's the other side of social comparison where people look at what other people have and it triggers self-resentment and helplessness on the inside, which gets projected as anger and hatred on the outside. And I think what it comes down to really is a person's internal locus of control. Because if somebody has that victim-y mentality where you feel like you're not in control of your life, that things happen to you, you will be far more susceptible to the negative part of social comparison. Whereas if you take accountability for your own life and the own trajectory of your life, and you believe that you have the ability to change your life with your own actions, then you will be more susceptible to the positive form of social comparison. My take on social comparison is when people make more money than me, I always think to myself, there is a reason. There's something that they're doing that I'm not doing, and I make it a goal to figure out what that reason is. And then I implement it in my life, or I see what parts of it I can implement into my life. Is it their career path? Is it their soft skills? Is it their technical skills? What did they do differently in their schedule, their routine, their execution that allows them to have that income level? The way I see it is I want to figure out what they're doing that I'm not doing. Social comparison can definitely be a tricky one, and Morgan talks about this a lot in the book because it does depend on your own emotional intellect, because if you don't use it properly, then it can be a lose-lose situation. Principle number 5 is wealth principles. Now, this book has so many excellent principles on wealth. Staying wealthy requires frugality and paranoia. I really liked that quote. Wealth is the accumulated leftovers of what you spend after you take in. You can build wealth without high income, but you have no chance of building wealth without high savings. Yeah, this is 100% true. The book talks a lot about having less ego so you can have more wealth. I definitely agree that there is a difference between real wealth and fake wealth. Real wealth, speaking as a CPA, is what you show on your tax return. Real wealth is what you have in your investment accounts, your real estate holdings, and your businesses. That is real wealth. Material possessions, things like cars and bags and expensive stuff, it signals a person had the money and the income to buy those things, but it doesn't mean that they have assets. And wealth is built with assets. And the biggest misconception that most people have around money is that income equals wealth, but there is a gap between income and wealth, and that gap is your spending eyeballs. Earning more and keeping more requires different skill sets. Some of them overlap, but confusing the two or mixing them up can definitely lead to financial difficulty and struggle. Morgan also says it is so important to make sure you're putting effort into both sides of the equation. Principle 6 is that you don't need to be right 100% of the time. No matter what you're doing with your money, a lot of things can go wrong. This is a really good principle for investing because people tend to look at individual investments and talk about individual investments, but at the end of the day, it's about what your portfolio netted overall. Totally normal and fine to have a large chunk of bad investments and a few outstanding ones. But so long as those outstanding ones outperform the bad ones, you've made money. And it's definitely true. As an accountant, I know that it's all about how much you net overall, not about, a single individual stock's performance. And as an investor myself, I've definitely looked into some stocks individually that I've bought and not been very thrilled with the outcome or my decision making. But nowadays, I try more to look at the total balance of my investments more than individual stocks. I think this principle also applies to business as well, not just investments. In business, the harder you work, the more opportunity and luck comes your way. Principle 7 is all about investing. There are a lot of golden nuggets in this book when it comes to investing. One of the ones I really liked is where they talked about how investing based on theory doesn't always lead to people winning. And I think he specifically talks about the book, The Intelligent Investor, if anyone's read that book before, and how people who win aren't necessarily following the practices of intelligent investor. The goal of being successful is to win more often than you lose and understand that investing is a long-term horizon. And the short-term price that you have to pay is volatility and uncertainty. The price of investing success is not immediate, and some people pay fines in the short term because they lose some money in the market because of the short-term volatility. It's important to develop the mindset that allows you to stick around long enough for investing gains to work in your favor over the long term. And this definitely applies to business as well, similar to what I had mentioned before. A lot of mentions about compound interest, which any personal finance book will. Just to reiterate that compound interest is important, compounding works over a long time period, and endurance is key. All wealthy people do use compound interest to grow their wealth passively and have their money working for them in their background. If you never checked out my video about dividend investing, up top, I highly recommend you check out that video. You do need to have a certain amount of wealth for compound interest to work, because a dollar compounded is still a dollar saved is still a dollar. Principle 8 is that we change our minds. He's a very good writer, and the way he explained things, just very articulate and well-spoken. We change our minds in the long term, and long-term planning is important. You know, we change as people, we change our perceptions, we change over time, and our minds are always changing. And because of that, it's important to think long-term, and it's important to not live on each edge financially too extremely. So on one side of financial extremes, it's saving so hard that you're scared to spend and don't even want to live. And then on the other side of financial extremes is when you spend so hard that you don't have financial security. And the last principle that I want to talk about is the price of freedom. This one by far is probably the one that really hit home for me and I resonate with the most. And this is something that I always knew already, but I like to hear more of. You know, I like hearing what I already believe to be true, just like anyone else does, because we're biased like this, right? I like how the point about freedom kind of affirmed my own personal decisions. The idea that money gives you freedom and control, I think that is the ultimate win in life. To be able to do things on your own terms, do things that you want to do. Having flexibility and control over your time, over your calendar, over your schedule is the biggest unseen return on wealth. I know that freedom and control for me personally is the thing that I value the most and the reason why I'm driven to work so hard for my goals. If you like this video today, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, let me know what other books you want me to read about personal finance, and maybe I'll make some more videos on those books in the future. Until next time.